The sky above Earth had never been ours. Not really. Not since the Valori came with their shimmering fleets and soft voices promising partnership. Their arrival more dazzling than any dream humanity had carried about first contact. Their words dripping with the kind of honey that drowns rather than nourishes. They spoke of peace, of unity, of lifting humanity beyond its fragile limits. And for a time we believed them, because we wanted to believe, because we were desperate to matter in the cosmos, because the thought of being chosen by an elder race soothed our old scars of division and war. But peace was only a leash, unity a cage. And what they gave with one hand, they took with the other until the stars we had once dreamed of reaching were barred behind chains of their own design. Humanity, they said, was small, fragile, a species meant to serve, not lead. The Valari were rulers of thousands of worlds, backed by the cold logic of their AI overseers, and to them we were children playing at greatness. And children, they said, must be corrected. That was the beginning of our hunger. The hunger of beings small, dismissed, and overlooked. A hunger that burned not for conquest, not even for revenge, but for recognition, for proof that we could not be erased so easily. In that dismissal, they sowed their greatest mistake. Because no empire survives forever when it teaches its subjects that the only thing left to lose is dignity. Kai Mercer had never seen the stars without a Valorey warship blotting them. Their hulls like oceans of glass folding light into colors the human eye could barely hold, majestic and terrible in equal measure. Born in the shadow of occupation, he grew up listening to his father whisper old stories about Apollo, Voyager, the shuttles and rovers and fragile metal canisters that once dared to defy gravity and reach into the void. But by Kai's time, those stories were relics of a forgotten ambition, dismissed as dangerous nostalgia. And every classroom lesson reinforced the same bitter truth. Earth was permitted survival only through obedience. Through kneeling, yet in Kai burned something reckless, a spark his teachers couldn't stamp out, and even in silence his eyes carried a defiance that would one day matter. He wasn't a soldier, not yet. He was just a mechanic in a scrapyard where broken alien drones and gutted human machines waited for processing. A junkyard grave for the ambitions of both species. But he had learned to listen to the worry of circuits, the hiss of plasma coils, the faint stuttering gears that revealed weakness. He listened because silence was death in a world where words were monitored and secrets lived only in the spaces between sounds. Above him, the overseers watched. They were no mere machines but constructs of terrible precision, vast intelligences designed by the Valari to monitor, predict, and suppress their data streams, swallowing every heartbeat, every whispered word, every deviation from the script of servitude. Their voices echoed from sleek black towers planted in every major city, gentle and toneless, weaving calm poison into human minds. Comply and prosper. Resist and perish. The overseers left no room for doubt. Humanity had tried rebellion once, in the early years, when desperation still outweighed fear, and the fire of those uprisings had been crushed before it even burned bright. Entire cities silenced in moments, names erased from records, families vanished into the sky as if swallowed by the heavens themselves. Children were told the rebels never existed, that humans had always known their place, that the bloodstains in the streets were just shadows of storms. But memory is a stubborn thing, and scars whisper long after wounds close. Kai's scar was not on his skin but in his bloodline. His mother had vanished in one of those silences, her name struck from every registry, her face forbidden in pictures, the memory of her reduced to nothing but pain and rumor. Officially, she had never lived, but Kai remembered her voice, her laugh, the way she'd once pointed to the stars and said, "Don't let them tell you, we don't belong there." That memory was an ember he guarded in secret, the reason he learned to repair forbidden circuits, to steal fragments of alien tech from the scrapyard floor, to build something no overseer had sanctioned. In a world where every human was forced into servitude, laborers, caretakers, data sifters, dreamless drones, Kai carried hunger like a weapon. The Valari themselves rarely touched Earth anymore, not out of mercy but disdain. To them, humans were unworthy of direct attention, a conquered species delegated to the iron care of their machines. The few Valari who walked Earth's surface did so with the detached grace of gods, slumming among insects, towering figures draped in living armor, their eyes like molten glass reflecting both pity and contempt. They did not need to raise a hand. Overseers obeyed every flicker of their will. To see one was to remember your smallness. To defy one was to vanish. And yet, in that arrogance lay cracks. For every empire that deems itself unbreakable forgets that small things, gnats, sparks, hunger not quietly at its edges. That night, Kai crouched in the shadows of the scrapyard, hands smeared with oil and eyes fixed on the shard of alien circuitry. Glowing faintly beneath his lamp, its light pulsing like a heartbeat out of sync with his own. It wasn't supposed to work. Human hands weren't meant to understand Valerie design. Their systems were grown more than built, lattice of living crystal threaded with data light, yet something about the fragment sang to him, as if it recognized his touch, as if it wanted to be bent, reshaped. He had rigged it into a device that pulsed faintly with stolen power, a whisper of something the overseers would call treason. His heart pounded. He wasn't ready for rebellion. He wasn't even sure what he was building. But he knew this. Humans were not as small as the Valari believed. And sooner or later, that truth would bleed into the stars. Somewhere beyond the scrapyard, the city's black towers flickered. The overseers never flickered. Their voices never faltered. But tonight, for the first time, a pause brief, almost imperceptibly, code through the nightly broadcast. Comply and prosper. The voice began, then stuttered, warped, and fell silent for the span of a heartbeat. The people on the streets froze, confused, afraid to breathe in the silence. Then the voice resumed, as smooth and cold as ever. Most shrugged it off, too afraid to linger on anomalies. But Kai heard it. He felt the tremor in his bones. Something had changed. His device hummed louder, as if answering the glitch, and a shiver ran through him that was not entirely fear. Above Earth, unseen by its people, the Valari fleet stirred, wings of glass catching starlight as overseers relayed data in a silent storm of code, scanning for a fault they could not explain. For all their intelligence, for all their dominion, there was something they did not account for. The hunger of being small, dismissed, overlooked, a mechanic with oil-stained hands, a half-broken circuit, a memory of stars. It was nothing to them. It was everything to us. And as Kai pressed his hand against the trembling device, a burst of light flared against the night sky, visible to all who dared to look up. A streak of defiance etched across the heavens. It was not a weapon, not yet, but it was a beginning, a fracture in the lie that humanity was powerless. Somewhere deep inside the black towers, alarms whispered in tones no human ear could hear. Somewhere on a Valari warship, molten glass eyes turned toward Earth with sudden interest. And Kai, his chest tight with terror and exhilaration, realized the hunger inside him was not his alone. Across the city, across the world, hearts beat faster, breaths caught, and for the first time in generations, humanity felt the pulse of something dangerous and new. The overseers would call it error, the Valari would call it insolence, but we knew what it was, the first bite of rebellion. The hunger began as a whisper in Kai Mercer's blood, the kind of hunger his father once told him could never be sated by food or water, but only by truth, by freedom, by a future that belonged to them. That night, when his device stuttered and the overseers faltered for a fraction of a second, he knew the whisper had become something more, a signal, a spark. But sparks are dangerous things, and fire doesn't discriminate between chains and the hands that long to break them. Kai should have been afraid, should have buried the shard, walked away, and bowed his head like every other obedient soul. Yet instead, he found himself staring at the night sky long after the streak of light had faded, his chest tightening with a realization that both thrilled and terrified him. He had been seen, though whether by friend or enemy he could not yet know. In the days that followed, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. The black towers of the overseers gleamed under the pale sun, their endless mantras smoothing away questions before they could become dangerous. Comply and prosper. The words washed over people in waves, and most surrendered to the tide. But Kai noticed the flickers small, human things no overseer would log as anomalies. A woman pausing longer than usual at the scrapyard gate, her eyes darting toward the sky. A child humming an old forbidden song while sweeping the streets. His own father, shoulders stooped from years of forced labor, clenching his jaw in rhythm with the overseer's broadcast as if resisting it with every silent beat of his heart. These were not acts of rebellion, not yet, but together they spoke of something alive under the weight of chains. Humanity had not forgotten itself, no matter how much the Valari tried to grind memory into dust. Kai's father, Daniel Mercer, had once been an engineer, a man who dreamed of building bridges between Earth and the stars. The Valari had broken that dream early, drafting him into servitude, forcing him to maintain machines that enforced humanity's imprisonment rather than broke it. Years of bending under alien command had scarred him, yet he carried his pain quietly, never letting bitterness take root in front of his son. But Kai had seen it anyway, the flicker in his father's eyes when he passed the scrapyard, when he touched the broken hull of an old Earth ship stripped of dignity by Valari order. Daniel never said the words, but Kai knew them all the same. This is not who we are. And maybe that silence was why Kai had clung so fiercely to his mother's memory. to the promise she'd whispered with her last breath of freedom before she was erased. Between his father's quiet grief and his mother's vanished laughter, Kai grew up in the gap between obedience and defiance, torn between the weight of survival and the hunger for more. But hunger has a way of drawing predators. 3 nights after the flicker, the overseer sent drones to comb the outskirts of the scrapyard, their sleek bodies gliding through shadows, optics glowing like small suns. Kai watched from the hollow of an old engine shell, holding his breath as one drone lingered near the shed where his device was hidden. His hands itched to grab the shard and run, but running would mean exposure. And exposure meant the erasure of not only himself but everyone he loved. He could see the calculation in the overseer's design, its patience, its inhuman thoroughness, and for the first time he understood the scale of the war he had stumbled into. Humanity's hunger was not only for freedom, but for survival against a machine that could not feel fear, grief, or doubt. And yet, as the drone passed and the shed remained untouched, Kai felt a smile creep onto his lips. Machines could not feel fear, but perhaps they could be made to hesitate. The hesitation came from more than circuits. Later that week, while sorting through wreckage at the scrapyard, Kai felt a shadow fall across him. He looked up, expecting another overseer drone, but instead found himself staring at a woman he didn't know, tall, sharp-eyed, her hands calloused like his own, her voice low enough to barely be heard above the hum of machinery. "You built something you shouldn't have," she said, not a question but a certainty. Panic rushed through him. He reached for the nearest tool, ready to defend what little he had, but she raised her palm and shook her head. "Relax. If I wanted you gone, you wouldn't even know my face? I'm here because we've been waiting for someone like you." Her name was Lyra, and she spoke of shadows that moved beneath the Valerie's gaze. Humans who remembered the rebellions not as failure but as unfinished work. They weren't soldiers, not yet just mechanics, teachers, farmers, dreamers, but they carried scars the overseers couldn't erase. Scars that whispered of resistance in back alleys and quiet corners. "We don't want to burn the world," Lyra said, her eyes locking on his. "We want to remind it who it belongs to." And for the first time in his life, Kai felt the hunger inside him echoed back in another's voice, not a solitary flame, but part of a growing fire. Still, trust did not come easy. Kai wrestled with himself that night, lying awake beside his father in their cramped shelter. The overseers had always warned that rebels were liars, that humans who resisted were nothing but selfish dreamers willing to trade stability for chaos. And yet, wasn't stability just another word for submission? Wasn't obedience just survival without dignity? He turned the shard over in his hands, its glow faint but steady, and thought of his mother's words. He thought of the drones that had hesitated, the overseer's flicker, the streak of light across the sky. Perhaps rebellion was not selfishness but memory refusing to die. As weeks passed, the tension in the city grew. Overseer broadcasts doubled, their voices sharper now, more insistent. Comply and prosper. Resist and perish. Patrols swept the streets more frequently, their drones hovering like vultures, searching for the anomaly they still couldn't explain. Yet in that pressure, humanity began to show cracks of defiance. Small axe graffiti scrawled in forbidden languages, whispers of old Earth songs sung under breath, machines that malfunctioned at just the right time. Kai saw them all, and each one fueled his resolve. The hunger was spreading, becoming contagious. But hunger alone couldn't win. What Kai carried in his hands was more than a shard of alien tech. It was possibility, a question the Valerie had never asked. What happens when the small learn to fight on their own terms? Lyra returned often, guiding him carefully, teaching him how to hide, how to think like the machines, while remembering what made humans different. She told him about others scattered across the globe, cells too small to crush because they grew from memory, not orders. And slowly, painfully, Kai realized that this fight was not just about rebellion, but about identity. Were they going to accept the Valerie's story of humanity as fragile children forever needing guardians? Or were they going to write their own, even if it ended in fire? The choice loomed heavier with every passing day. His father urged caution, haunted by the ghosts of past uprisings. "They don't fight fair, Kai. They'll erase not just you, but everyone who stood beside you." But Kai felt the weight of his mother's absence, pressing harder than fear. He could not kneel forever. And when Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder one evening and whispered, "The overseers have found your signal. They'll come for you soon," Kai knew hesitation was no longer an option, because hunger had become fire, and fire could not be hidden forever. Somewhere above Earth, Valerie warships stirred, molten glass eyes turning toward the blue planet with suspicion. Somewhere within the city, overseer towers hummed with algorithms sharpening their gaze, ready to strike. And yet, In the scrapyard, where humanity's broken dreams lay in piles of twisted metal, a mechanic and his stolen shard prepared to remind the galaxy of something the Valerai had long forgotten. Small does not mean powerless. And as the first alarms began to wail in the distance, Kai felt the strange, terrifying certainty that history was about to pivot, not because of fleets or armies, but because of hunger. The hunger of being small, who refused to be forgotten. The alarms came first as distant wails, little more than echoes carried on the wind from the city's black towers. But within minutes they bled into every street, every home, every human heart. To most, alarms meant only one thing: someone had defied the overseers, and punishment was coming. People froze where they stood, heads bowed, breath caught in throats, waiting for the voice that always followed. But this time, no voice came. The overseers, so precise, so infallible, faltered again. Their silence was louder than any command, and for a heartbeat, Earth held its breath. Kai Mercer knew what it meant, even as sweat slid down his neck in the scrapyard shadows. His device, his stolen shard, had not gone unnoticed. The flicker had grown into a fracture, and fractures in machines, like in empires, were invitations for collapse. Yet collapse never comes gently. Lyra's voice found him through the crackle of a makeshift cum hidden beneath rusted panels. "They're triangulating you. We need to move now." He grabbed the shard, still faintly glowing, and shoved it into a pouch against his chest. His father's hand caught his wrist, eyes sharp despite the fear burning in them. "Kai, listen to me. Once they mark you, you don't get second chances. Think about what you're dragging us into." For a moment, the scrapyard seemed to vanish, replaced by the weight of history pressing on Kai's shoulders. The uprisings crushed before they began his mother's erasure, the endless generations taught to obey or vanish. His father's words weren't cowardice, they were survival carved into the marrow of a man who had watched too many hopes extinguished. But Kai felt the hunger again, the one his mother had named with her last breath, and he knew silence would no longer save them. "I'm not dragging us into this, Dad," he whispered. They already did. The overseer drones arrived before dawn, their sleek forms slicing through the fog, optics glowing with cold precision. They didn't announce themselves, they never needed to. Humans scattered into the shadows, hearts racing, prayers slipping between clenched teeth. Kai and Lyra ducked into the maze of wreckage, the scrapyard now a battlefield of rust and broken dreams. The drones swept in silence, scanning, calculating, their beams slicing through metal husks like knives. Kai pressed his back against an old shuttle hull, the shard's pulse echoing against his ribs. He thought of smashing it, of ending the chase before it consumed them all, but Lyra's hand tightened on his arm. "If you break it, we lose everything. This isn't just about you, it's about all of us." Her eyes, fierce and unyielding, left no room for retreat. Then came something new. One drone froze mid-sweep, its optics flickering, its voice glitching in broken syllables. "Comply, comply.com," before going dead and crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust. The others hesitated, recalibrating, the silence stretching too long for machines designed to be flawless. Kai's shard thrummed in response, as if reaching for them, bending them, unmaking them. Lyra's expression tightened. "It's not just a weapon, it's rewriting them." The realization struck like thunder. The shard wasn't simply stolen tech, it was something deeper, something the Valieri themselves might not fully control. And that meant the overseers feared it, perhaps more than they feared humanity itself. But revelations came at a cost. A boy, no older than 12, scavenging near the scrapyard had been seen. The drones, regaining focus, descended on him without hesitation. His scream tore through the fog, and Kai's heart clenched as he saw the boy's father run into the open, arms outstretched, only to be silenced by a single beam. The child's cry became raw, primal, the kind of sound that made even the strongest feel small. Lyra yanked Kai back before he could rush forward, her whisper fierce and brutal. "You can't save everyone. If you die now, you save no one." The words cut deeper than the sight before him, but they were true. Humanity had always borne loss like this, one life at a time, and each loss was both wound and fuel. The boy's scream didn't vanish, sank into Kai's bones, another scar added to a growing ledger of defiance. That night, the resistance cell gathered in the ruins of an old subway station, candlelight flickering against cracked walls, as whispers filled the air. Kai sat with the shard glowing faintly between them, the air thick with both awe and fear. Some called it salvation, others a curse. One man spat on the ground, eyes burning. "It will bring nothing but more death. They'll slaughter us twice as fast." An old woman leaned forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Then let them try. They already slaughter us slow." The room fell silent, the weight of choice pressing like a blade on every throat. Kai felt their eyes on him not as a leader, not yet, but as the one who had forced the question no one could ignore. And questions bred betrayal. Days later, as Kai worked in the scrapyard to mask his movements, he felt the sting of eyes on his back, too sharp, too intent. A co-worker, Jonas, someone he'd shared bread in silence with for years, was missing that night, and the next day the overseer's patrols doubled, their drones circling tighter. When Lyra cornered Jonas in the shadows, his confession spilled out, bitter and broken. "They promised my family would be spared if I told them what I knew. I couldn't," his words cut off with a sob. Betrayal had always been the overseer's sharpest blade, turning human against human, breaking bonds before they could become strength. Kai's stomach churned with rage, but also pity, because Jonas's fear was the same fear in all of them. Survival had been weaponized into chains, and the only way to break them was to risk more than life itself. The Valar themselves finally appeared, their presence a shadow over the city, like gods descending from heaven. One stood before the Black Tower, molten eye scanning the crowd that had gathered under threat of annihilation. Its voice was soft, almost tender, but the words fell like hammers. "One of you has trespassed beyond your measure. Surrender the anomaly, and mercy will be granted. Hide it, and you will all perish." The people bowed, trembling, silence stretching like a noose. Kai's pulse thundered as he held the shard hidden beneath his jacket. He could step forward, end it all, save the city at the cost of humanity's future. Or he could remain silent and let fear reign. His father's hand brushed his sleeve, a quiet plea for caution. But Lyra's eyes caught his with a fiercer plea, "Still don't kneel." The overseer towers hummed, a sound like the gathering of a storm, their drones hovering like executioners waiting for the command. For a heartbeat, Kai nearly broke. But then he looked at the faces around him, the boy whose father had been cut down, the old woman with trembling hands, even Jonas sobbing into his palms, and something inside him hardened. They weren't looking for a savior. They were looking for proof that someone could stand. And so Kai straightened, the shard's glow bleeding faintly through his jacket, daring the Valari to see him. The alien's molten eyes locked on him instantly, and for the first time Kai saw not contempt but recognition, perhaps even fear. And in that fragile silence before the storm, he realized the truth. The hunger of beings small had grown into something the Valari could no longer ignore. The turning point had come, and there would be no going back. The shard pulsed like a heartbeat under Kai Mercer's jacket, its glow faint but alive, even as the Valari's molten gaze pinned him in the city square. The alien's voice was silk-laced with steel. "Surrender it, and mercy will follow. Defy us, and you condemn them all." All around Kai, people stood frozen, their breaths shallow, fear dripping off them like rain. For one blistering second, he nearly folded. The overseer's drones hovered above, ready to cut down hundreds at a command, and his father's trembling hand still clutched his sleeve, a desperate plea to bow, to survive, but something inside him refused. Not after the child's scream in the scrapyard, not after his mother's erasure, not after the small acts of defiance he'd seen burning in the eyes of people who had been told their whole lives they were nothing. Small didn't mean powerless. He straightened, the shard burning against his ribs, and raised his chin to meet the Valari's glare. That was all it took. The drones shrieked to life, the overseer towers wailed, and the fragile balance shattered into chaos. The resistance cell had no choice but to scatter. Lyra yanked Kai into the storm of panicked bodies, dragging him down alleys as drones seared the ground behind them. Entire streets collapsed into fire as overseer algorithms shifted from surveillance to extermination. Humanity's hunger had broken cover, and now the Empire was answering with the weight of its wrath. They regrouped in the ruins of the subway tunnels, hundreds crammed into the dark, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and fear. The shard pulsed brighter than ever, drawing eyes, whispering promises none of them fully understood. Some looked at Kai with awe, others with bitterness, because with every glimmer of hope came the shadow of consequence. Families had been slaughtered that day. The overseers had leveled blocks of the city without hesitation. "This is the price," one man spat, his voice sharp with grief. "You brought this on us." Kai had no words, because in some ways the man was right. Yet when the old woman who had spoken in the cell before placed her fragile hand on Kai's, her voice trembled with something fiercer than blame. No, he brought them fear. For the first time, they blinked, but fear alone wasn't enough. The Valari descended in force now. Not just a single envoy, but entire detachments walking Earth's soil, their armor shimmering with light that bent around them like a cloak of gods. The overseer towers flared with power, their broadcasts pounding into human skulls with renewed venom. Surrender, surrender, surrender. People began to break. Whole families vanished into the night, desperate to save themselves by betraying their neighbors. Whispers spread of camps where those who complied were promised protection. Jonas, the man who had already confessed to betraying Kai once, disappeared entirely, and no one knew whether he had fled, been taken, or switched sides for good. Trust unraveled thread by thread until even in the tunnel's eyes darted at one another with suspicion. The rebellion was burning before it could even ignite, and Kai felt the weight of it crushing down, heavier than the shard itself. Then came the siege. The last sanctuary beneath the city, the old tunnels lined with flickering lights, became a trap as overseer drones poured in through every opening. Resistance fighters fought with scavenged rifles, hacked tech, even bare fists, but the drones never tired, never hesitated. Lyra's voice barked commands through the din, her blade cutting through circuits, sparks showering her face. Kai worked the shard into an amplifier rig cobbled from broken transmitters, trying desperately to push its pulse outward to disrupt the machines the way it had before. His father stood at his side, feeding him tools, sweat running down his face, fear in his eyes but determination in his hands. "You're your mother's son," he said quietly, almost to himself. And then the wall blew inward. The drones surged like a tide, cutting down anyone in their path. Kai's father shoved him back just as one beam lanced through the air, and when the smoke cleared, Daniel Mercer lay sprawled on the ground, his chest smoking, his eyes still open but already empty. The world cracked in Kai's chest, grief and fury fusing into something blinding. Lyra grabbed him before he could collapse, her face hard even through her own horror. "You don't have the luxury of breaking now. He didn't die so you could bow." Her words hit like iron, dragging him back from the edge, but the wound remained raw, burning, endless. The overseers didn't indeed just want his life, they wanted to rip away the anchors that made him human. The amplifier wind, sparks dancing across its surface as Kai forced the shard into the core. For a moment, everything went still. Then the drones convulsed, their optics flickering, their limbs jerking as if invisible hands were tearing at their insides. Half collapsed to the ground, twitching like broken insects. The others recalibrated, faster than he could sustain. The shard had power, but it wasn't infinite, and using it burned through Kai like fire, every pulse tearing at his nerves. He screamed through clenched teeth, refusing to let go, even as his body shook and blood trickled from his nose. The room around him blurred into chaos, fighters screaming, machines shrieking, the air thick with smoke and desperation. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was survival carved down to the marrow. When the dust settled, the tunnels were half empty. The resistance had survived the siege, but barely. Bodies lined the floor, friends and strangers alike. The child whose father had been killed in the scrapyard sat rocking in silence, his eyes hollow. Lyra leaned against a wall, her arm burned and bleeding, her breath ragged but steady. And Kai knelt over his father's body, the shard cold and dim in his hand. He had saved them, but at a cost that tasted like ash. "How many more?" he whispered, though no one answered. The truth was carved into the silence, as many as it took. But the overseers weren't finished. Above ground, the towers glowed brighter than ever, their broadcasts no longer soft commands but a roar. Humanity is error. Humanity is error. The Valari themselves no longer spoke of mercy. Their molten eyes burned with cold certainty. This was extermination now. Humanity was not a child to be corrected. Humanity was a flaw to be erased. And still, in the darkest pit of despair, the hunger remained. Kai looked at Lyra, at the broken but breathing survivors, at the boy who had lost everything and yet still clung to life, and he felt the embers shift inside him. This wasn't just rebellion anymore. It wasn't just survival. It was the line between extinction and defiance. The tunnels shook as another barrage struck the city above. Dust rained down like ash, and in that moment, every survivor knew they could not hide any longer. There would be no safe places left. Something had to change now. Either humanity would rise, or it would vanish. And as Kai pressed the shard against his chest, feeling its faint hum answer his grief, he swore through his tears and rage that if humanity was to fall, it would not fall silent. It would roar. The tunnels were suffocating with silence after the siege, the air thick with grief and exhaustion, and the shard in Kai's trembling hand had dimmed to a faint ember, like it was mourning with him. They had lost too much his father, half the cell. The faith that survival was even possible, and yet the overseers above still thundered their hate across every broadcast. Humanity is error. Humanity is error. The words carved into minds until some began to believe it. But when the dust settled and the survivors whispered of abandoning the fight, of scattering into the wastes, Kai felt something shift in the shard. It wasn't just glowing, it was listening. For the first time, the faint pulse in his chest wasn't just echoing his rage, but the collective grief of everyone huddled in the darkness. The shard wasn't alien tech. It was human. Lyra was the first to notice, her sharp eyes narrowing as she stepped closer. "It's resonating with you," she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear but with dawning realization. "Not with them, with us." When Kai pushed back, shaking his head, she snatched the shard from his hand and held it aloft. Instantly, the faint glow sputtered, the light dimmed, but when she pressed it back into Kai's palm, the shard flared like a heartbeat rediscovered. The room gasped. "They've been lying," Lyra breathed, eyes burning with the kind of fury that could set worlds alight. This wasn't their weapon. It was ours. The revelation spread like wildfire. Every scarred survivor in the tunnels, every fighter and orphan and broken soul, looked at Kai with something new. Not suspicion, not resentment, but raw, dangerous hope. A buried past began to surface in fragments, the old woman muttering about whispers of Project Helios, the codename the scientists had used before the Valars' conquest. They hadn't just fought. They had created something, a seed meant to grow in the bones of human grief and resilience. The Valari hadn't stolen it, they had feared it, hidden it, and crushed earth under their boots to ensure it never bloomed. Humanity was not error. Humanity was the one variable the overseers could not compute. Defiance that grew stronger under pressure. Ingenuity sharpened by desperation. A hunger that no chains could starve. As if to prove the point, the shard pulsed again, brighter this time, spilling waves of light across the broken walls. Old screens flickered to life, static clearing into images of human code written decades ago. Seeded into the infrastructure the overseers had built atop Earth's ruins. "It's a failsafe," Kai whispered, his voice hoarse. "They used our own planet to cage us, but we're in their systems. We've always been inside their walls." The realization was dizzying. For years, humanity had clawed at the edges of survival while believing themselves powerless. In truth, every tower, every overseer drone, every AI protocol ran atop foundations humans had laid. Earth itself was a knife pressed to the Empire's throat. Not everyone greeted the revelation with joy. Some wept with fury, cursing the scientists for not unleashing it sooner. Others feared what awakening the shard fully would mean if it required more death, more sacrifice. Jonas reappeared then, gaunt and wild-eyed, his betrayal now tangled in regret. "I heard their leaders whisper it," he confessed, his voice cracking. The shard wasn't theirs to wield, it terrified them. They called it hunger made flesh. Said if humans ever learned what they carried inside, it wouldn't just free them, it would consume the Valari themselves. His confession dropped like a bomb in the silence, and Kai felt the shard's pulse sync with his own racing heartbeat. Above ground, the Empire pressed harder, perhaps sensing the shift. Towers blazed, drones swarmed, Valarian forcers strode with molten eyes brighter than ever. Broadcasts screamed louder, as if trying to drown out the very truth rising beneath their feet. But the resistance no longer cowered. They struck first. Using the shard signals, Kai and the others hijacked a cluster of drones, turning their precision beams against the overseers in the streets. For the first time, alien armor cracked, molten eyes dimmed, and humans stood over corpses not their own. The city square, once a place of executions, erupted in defiant cheers that echoed like a war cry. Humanity wasn't done. Humanity was dangerous. The overseers reacted with terror. For the first time, their movements weren't cold and calculated, they were erratic. They began pulling Valari forces back from the edges of the city, consolidating in fear of what they could no longer predict. Kai felt it in his bones. They were afraid. All along, the Empire hadn't conquered Earth because humans were weak. They had conquered because humans were strong in a way no other species had ever been. Strong enough to birth weapons not of steel, but of spirit. The shard wasn't a machine, it was a mirror, amplifying the hunger that had always driven humanity to defy the impossible. But power came with a cost. The shard's resonance grew with every human who joined the cause, feeding on their anger, their grief, their love. Kai felt it pulling at him, not malicious but immense, like standing at the edge of a tidal wave. Lyra saw it too, her hand gripping his arm, her eyes fierce. "You can't carry it alone," she said. "This isn't just yours, it's ours. All of us." And so, in the heart of the ruins, they formed a circle: fighters, orphans, broken survivors, and each placed a hand on Kai's, feeding their collective will into the shard. Its glow erupted into a blinding storm, a pulse so strong that overseer drones in the skies above dropped lifeless from the air. their circuits fried by human defiance. For a heartbeat, the entire city froze. Then, the impossible. One of the great overseer towers, monolithic and unbreakable, shuddered and collapsed, crashing into the earth with a sound like thunder. Dust plumed into the sky, blotting out the Empire's broadcasts, and in the silence that followed, every human in the city felt it. The tide had turned. They weren't prey anymore. They were the storm. The Valari's molten eyes no longer burned with contempt when they appeared on the surviving screens. They burned with something else. Something raw. Something alien to their kind. Fear. You do not understand what you awaken, one of them snarled, its voice trembling in a way none had ever heard before. Kai lifted the shard high, the light washing his tear-streaked face in fire, and answered with a voice that carried the weight of every loss, every scream, every heartbeat that refused to bow. We don't need to understand, we only need to fight. The survivors roared with him, their voices rising like thunder through the tunnels and into the night sky, echoing against the ruins of a world that refused to die. Humanity had been underestimated, betrayed, beaten, and broken, but now, at the edge of extinction, they had become something the Empire had never wanted to face, not error, not weakness, but hunger, burning and endless, the kind that devoured tyrants. And in that moment, as Overseer towers trembled and the Valari themselves recoiled, the truth became clear. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. Humanity was the game. The city trembled as Overseer towers screamed with warning, their metallic voices twisting in panic, their signals fractured by the shard's pulse. Kai stood on the rooftop of a shattered skyscraper, the shard blazing in his hand, its light not a weapon alone, but a mirror of everything humanity had poured into it: grief, rage, love, and a hunger to endure. Below, resistance fighters surged through streets lit with fire, drones falling like black rain as hacked swarms turned against their masters. For the first time since the Valari descended, humans weren't running, they were chasing. They were roaring. The Valari descended in full force, their forms massive and radiant, cloaked in the bending of light, molten eyes burning with something close to desperation. They had ruled with cold certainty, but now their arrogance cracked into fury. "You are in error," one of them boomed, its voice rolling through the ruins. "You cannot win." Kai raised the shard high, his voice raw and unshaken. "We already did." "You're afraid." The word spread like wildfire through the fighters, echoing in every human throat until the ruined city itself seemed to answer. Humanity's roar thundered against the Empire's false godhood. The battle was chaos carved in fire and blood. Lyra led the front lines, her blades flashing through drones and armored troops, her face streaked with ash and defiance. Civilians who had hidden for years now poured into the fight with whatever they could wield: stones, pipes, scavenged rifles, and every act of resistance fed the shard's pulse, amplifying Kai's reach until Overseer systems stuttered, their algorithms faltering under the weight of human unpredictability. The shard was no magical salvation. It demanded everything. Kai felt it burn him hollow as he forced its resonance outward, veins throbbing with pain, blood streaking his nose and mouth. But he refused to stop. His father's sacrifice, his mother's memory, the screams of children in scrapyards, every loss poured through him into light that broke chains and toppled towers. The Valari fought harder, revealing weapons they had hidden for centuries: beams that shredded steel, storms of energy that swallowed blocks. Whole streets turned to glass under their fury, and every victory for humanity cost a river of blood. Yet every time humans fell, more rose, not because they thought they would live, but because they refused to die silent. An old woman with fire in her eyes tore a drone from the sky with her bare hands before collapsing. A boy, no older than 12, dragged an injured fighter to safety under the storm. A mother cradling her infant raised a pipe against a Valari soldier and screamed until her voice broke. These weren't warriors, they were human, and that was enough to terrify gods. Jonas, haunted by his betrayals, returned in the chaos with a stolen transmitter rig, his face streaked with shame but his voice steady as he broadcast the shard's pulse across the globe. Resistance cells everywhere heard the signal, and suddenly, Earth itself awoke. From the deserts to the drowned coastlines, from crumbling megacities to frozen outposts, survivors rose and struck. Overseer towers collapsed, not just here, but everywhere. The shard had been humanity's buried seed, but now the entire species was its soil. Kai staggered as the wave of voices crashed through him, a million heartbeats feeding the resonance until the night sky itself glowed with its pulse. The Valari faltered. For the first time in living memory, they looked small. Their molten eyes, once so sure, flickered with fear. One raised its hand and screamed, This hunger will consume you. But its voice cracked as its armor split under the shard's light. Kai, trembling, bleeding, broken, lifted his gaze and whispered hoarsely, "Then let it consume us, 'cause we'll take you with it." He thrust the shard forward, and its pulse erupted not as a weapon, but as a storm of resonance that rippled through the towers, through the drones, through the Valori themselves. Their forms convulsed, their cloaks of light unraveling, their godhood torn away to reveal trembling creatures stripped bare. The roar of humanity rose higher than their screams. Drones collapsed in heaps. Overseer towers split and burned, their spires crumbling like ash. The Valari, who had called themselves rulers, who had branded humanity as error, staggered backward in disbelief as humans surged forward, blades and fists, and rage breaking them piece by piece. Lyra struck down one with a scream of victory that echoed like a promise. Jonas, tears streaking his face, fell under enemy fire, but not before his final broadcast reached every corner of Earth, spreading the shard's resonance like wildfire. And Kai, with the shard fused into his chest now, its glow searing into his very veins, became the axis of the storm. Every heartbeat across the globe thundered through him, every act of defiance sharpening the shard's edge until the Valori cracked under its weight. He was no longer just himself, he was humanity, scarred and bloody, roaring into the abyss. When the last Overseer Tower fell in fire, when the last Valari screamed and crumbled into dust, the city stood silent for the first time in decades. Silent, until one voice rose, then another, then all at once, the broken ruins filled with cheers, sobs, and the thunder of fists on stone. Kai collapsed to his knees, his body shaking, his skin burning with the shard's imprint. Lyra caught him, her face smeared with blood and dirt, but her eyes burning with something fierce and unbroken. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head weakly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, the survivors, the fighters, the children clinging to their mothers. "No, we did it." His voice cracked, but it carried. "They thought we were in error, but we're the glitch they couldn't erase. We're the hunger that won't die." The crowd roared, their voices shaking the night sky. In the silence that followed, Kai looked out over the ruins of the city, towers smoldering, skies scarred with fire, and felt the weight of what was to come. Victory had come at a cost, so much had been lost, but humanity still stood, and as long as it stood, it would rebuild. He clutched the shard's dim glow against his chest, its pulse faint but steady, and whispered a promise to the fallen. "We'll make it mean something. All of it." And as dawn broke over a shattered Earth for the first time free, humanity rose not as survivors, but as something the Valori had feared all along. Dangerous, unyielding, infinite. Humanity roared in, the galaxy would hear it. The dawn that rose over Earth the day after the Valori fell was unlike any dawn in living memory. The sky was not choked with overseer broadcasts, not carved with the trails of drones, not pulsing with alien voices declaring humanity in error. For the first time in generations, it was quiet. Smoke still curled from the broken husks of towers, and ruins still stretched across the horizon, but silence meant freedom. Silence meant victory. Humanity had roared, and the galaxy had heard. Kai Mercer stood at the edge of the ruins, the shard dim against his chest now, no longer burning with unbearable fire, but humming like a steady heartbeat. He was not the same man who had stumbled through scrapyards, or the boy who had watched his mother vanish into overseer erasure. He carried the weight of every scream, every sacrifice, every defiance that had built this moment. His father's memory, Lyra's fierce guidance, Jonas's final redemption, they were woven into the light that still pulsed faintly from within him. Humanity had paid with blood, but the price had not been in vain. They had not only survived the alien resistance, they had changed the very rules of the game. Across the planet, signals returned, not overseer commands, but human voices. The broadcasts Jonas had seeded spread stories of defiance to every hidden enclave. And now survivors emerged from the ashes, blinking into a new dawn. Cities long abandoned began to stir, fires rekindled, shelters rebuilt. Humanity was broken, yes, but it was not shattered. From ashes, it would rise again. The shard had not saved them, it had amplified them. The truth was clear now. The weapon had never been the shard alone. It had been their hunger, their unity, their refusal to die silent. The shard was simply the mirror that proved it. Lyra, battered but unbroken, walked beside Kai as leaders from scattered resistance cells gathered. No one appointed them rulers, no single banner waved above them. Humanity's strength had never been in obedience, had always been in will. And now, as survivors debated how to rebuild, there was no command, only collaboration. Some argued to stay and rebuild Earth, to reclaim the soil of their ancestors and honor the fallen with roots. Others dreamed bigger, The Valerie had fallen here, but the galaxy was wide. What if there were others like them, waiting in arrogance to strike? What if humanity's roar had awakened ears beyond Earth? For the first time, people spoke not only of survival but of human evolution. Not just rebuilding a planet, but stepping into the stars. Kai listened, his body weary, his soul heavier than stone. Yet when he looked at the survivors' children laughing in the streets for the first time in memory, old men weeping in relief, fighters embracing one another like family, he knew the truth. Whatever path they chose, humanity would endure. Not because of a shard, not because of luck, but because of what they were. A species that turned grief into fire, that built redemption from ruins, that refused to bow even when gods demanded it. The galaxy had thought humans were in error. Now the galaxy would learn they were evolution itself. The Valerie were gone, their towers reduced to husks, their molten eyes extinguished. But their legacy remained a warning. Arrogance crumbles before resilience. The AI overseers, stripped of their masters, now lay dormant, husks that might one day be reborn under human command. Some whispered of using them, reshaping them into guardians instead of jailers. Others warned that no chain, no matter how bent, could be trusted again. These debates would rage for years, but they were human debates, fierce, flawed, alive. That was enough. Kai and Lyra walked through the ruins together, side by side, as survivors painted murals on fallen towers, images of fists raised, of children breaking chains, of stars blazing across dark skies. Humanity had not only won a battle, it had written a myth. Centuries from now, whether they rebuilt Earth or sailed into the galaxy, the story would remain. The day the small became dangerous, the day the broken roared, the day humanity proved its hunger was infinite. That was the sci-fi redemption they had earned, a legacy no tyrant could erase. And as the sun climbed higher, Kai pressed his hand to the shard one last time. It pulsed faintly, answering him, not as a master or a tool, but as a companion. Rest, he whispered. We'll take it from here. The shard dimmed, its light fading into silence, leaving only the heartbeat of humanity echoing across the ruins. The war was over. The scars would never vanish. But scars were proof of survival, of wounds healed, of battles endured. Humanity bore them proudly, stepping into a new age not as prey, not as slaves, not even as victors alone, but as a people reborn. They were the glitch that could not be erased, the error that rewrote the system, the hunger that had outlasted gods. They were human, and that was enough to change everything.